I still remember the exact moment I realized I didn't matter. It wasn't when my mother, Linda, forgot my birthday 3 years running, or when she missed my college graduation because Jessica had a minor fender bender. It wasn't even when she told me I was being too sensitive after I cried finding out about her engagement through a Facebook post. No, the moment of absolute clarity came when I received a cream-colored wedding invitation in the mail, addressed to Dr. and Mrs. Marcus Mitchell, with a handwritten note at the bottom that read, "We'd be honored if Marcus could provide a consultation for the bridal party's pre-wedding treatments. Let's discuss rates." Not an invitation to her only other daughter, a business proposal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Riverside, I learned early that love in the Chen household came with conditions that I could never quite meet. Linda, my mother, had this way of making everything feel like a transaction. Affection was currency, and somehow I was always operating at a deficit. It started small, the way these things always do. When I was 7 and Jessica was 4, I'd built an elaborate fort out of couch cushions in the living room. I'd spent hours arranging it perfectly, creating little rooms and windows, a masterpiece of childhood architecture. When Jessica saw it, she wanted to play too, but only if she could be the queen and I could be her servant. I said no. I just wanted to play house, where we were both equals, both important. Linda walked in during our negotiation and sighed in that particular way that made my stomach drop. "Sarah, honey, just let Jessica be the queen. She's younger, and you know how she gets when she doesn't get her way." When I pointed out that I'd built the fort and should get to choose the game, Linda's expression shifted to something I'd see countless times over the years. Disappointment mixed with inconvenience, as if my desire for fairness was a character flaw she'd been hoping I'd outgrow. "That's not how families work, sweetheart," she said, settling onto the couch with her coffee. "We make sacrifices for the people we love. Jessica needs you to be the big sister here." I was 7. I didn't understand that what she was really saying was that Jessica's happiness would always matter more than mine, that my role was to be the cushion that absorbed every impact so Jessica never had to feel the sting of disappointment. As we grew older, the pattern didn't fade, it crystallized. Linda had this gift for making every situation somehow about Jessica's needs, Jessica's feelings, Jessica's future. When I turned 13 and asked for a birthday party, Linda wrinkled her nose and said parties were expensive and wasteful. When Jessica turned 13 2 years later, Linda threw her a surprise party at Chuck E. Cheese with 20 kids and a custom cake shaped like a unicorn. When I asked why Jessica got a party when I didn't, Linda looked genuinely puzzled. "Well, Sarah, you never really seemed like the party type," she said, as if my lack of enthusiasm for celebrations hadn't been directly created by years of having my request dismissed. "Jessica is more social. She needs these experiences." The logic was airtight in Linda's world. Jessica needed, therefore Jessica received. Sarah was practical, independent, self-sufficient. Therefore, Sarah could do without. In high school, the disparity became harder to ignore and impossible to rationalize. I played varsity soccer for 4 years, made honor roll consistently, and worked weekends at Pacific Medical Supply to save money for college. Linda came to exactly 3 of my games, and 2 of those were because Jessica was forced to attend and Linda had to drive her. Meanwhile, Jessica joined drama club junior year, and suddenly Linda was front row at every rehearsal, every performance, every cast party. She became the unofficial drama mom, organizing carpools and fundraisers, beaming with pride as she told anyone who would listen about Jessica's natural talent and bright future in the arts. I scored the winning goal in the regional championship my senior year, a moment I'd dreamed about since I started playing. As I looked into the stands, searching for my mother's face in the crowd, I found her. She was there, but she was on her phone, scrolling through something with a slight frown. She'd missed it. The moment I'd worked 4 years to achieve, and she'd missed it while sitting 20 feet away. When I brought it up later, she seemed genuinely sorry, but not sorry enough to put the phone away at Jessica's winter showcase 2 weeks later. College applications revealed the starkest inequality yet.
I spent months researching schools, writing essays, applying for scholarships. I worked extra shifts at the medical supply company to save money for application fees. When I got into UC Davis with partial financial aid, Linda hugged me and said she was proud, but I could see the calculator running behind her eyes. Even with aid, college was expensive. We'd have to be practical. I took out student loans, worked study programs, lived in the cheapest dorms, and ate ramen more nights than I care to remember. 2 years later, Jessica applied to exactly one school, USC's theater program, one of the most expensive private universities in California. She didn't apply for scholarships, didn't research cheaper alternatives, didn't even visit other campuses. When she got in, Linda cried tears of joy and immediately started planning how they'd make it work. Bob, my stepfather who'd married Linda when I was 12, took out a second mortgage on the house. Linda got a weekend job at Nordstrom. They liquidated their retirement savings, all of it willingly, joyfully, without a single conversation about practicality or loans or cheaper alternatives. When I asked Linda how they could afford to do for Jessica what they couldn't do for me, her answer was swift and sure. Jessica's dreams are more fragile, Sarah. Your dreams are more flexible. You've always been so capable, so independent. Jessica needs more support to bloom. The word bloom stuck with me, as if I were a weed expected to grow anywhere under any conditions, while Jessica was an orchid requiring perfect soil, perfect light, perfect care. But the pattern I truly couldn't ignore emerged during holidays and family gatherings. Linda would spend weeks preparing for Jessica's visits home from USC. The house would be cleaned top to bottom, favorite meals prepared, special desserts made. Linda would clear her entire schedule to be available for shopping trips, mother-daughter lunches, and long talks about Jessica's classes, her friends, her dreams. When I came home from Davis, which was farther away and harder to reach, Linda would greet me warmly enough, but there was no preparation, no cleared schedule. I was expected to fit into the existing routine, to be grateful.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For whatever attention was left after Jessica's needs were met. The Christmas of my junior year, I decided to test this theory. I called Linda 2 weeks before the holiday and asked if we could have a special dinner together, just the two of us, sometime during my visit. Something we'd never done, but that I'd always wanted. Linda hesitated, then said she'd see what she could do. Jessica called 3 days later asking for the same thing, and Linda immediately offered to take her to that new expensive brunch place in downtown Riverside the day after Christmas. When I asked about our dinner, Linda seemed confused. "Oh, honey, I thought you meant a family dinner. We'll all be together Christmas Eve." When I clarified that I'd asked for one-on-one time, just like Jessica was getting, Linda's tone turned slightly defensive. Well, Jessica specifically mentioned wanting to talk about her future, her career plans. She's at such a crucial point right now. I didn't bother pointing out that I was also at a crucial point, also thinking about my future. In Linda's world, my crucial points were things I'd figure out on my own. After college, I moved to Pasadena and threw myself into building a career in medical sales. I was good at it, connecting with doctors and clinics, understanding their needs, building relationships based on trust and expertise. It was through this work that I met Marcus at a dermatology conference in San Diego. He was presenting on new laser technology, and I was representing the company that distributed the equipment. Our first conversation was about photodynamic therapy and fractional resurfacing, but somehow we ended up talking until the conference center closed, covering everything from our college experiences to our favorite hiking trails. Marcus was different from anyone I'd ever dated. He listened when I talked, remembered details about my work and my interests, asked follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned weeks earlier. When I told him about my family dynamics, trying to be fair and balanced in my description, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that stopped me cold. "It sounds like they trained you to believe your needs don't matter." That must have been exhausting. No one had ever put it that way before. Exhausting. Yes, it had been exhausting.
Constantly adapting, constantly accommodating, constantly making myself smaller so others could be more comfortable. Our relationship developed slowly, built on respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. Marcus's dermatology practice was thriving, but success hadn't made him arrogant or careless. He was thoughtful about his work, his patients, his relationships. When he talked about expanding his practice, bringing in new technology, creating a center that could offer the latest treatments, his excitement was infectious. He had vision and the skills to make it a reality. I introduced him to my family 6 months into our relationship at Jessica's birthday dinner. Linda was charming, asking him about his work with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for Jessica's stories. Bob shook his hand firmly and made jokes about free medical advice. Jessica flirted just enough to be noticeable, but not enough to be called out. It was a pleasant evening, but I noticed how the conversation kept circling back to Marcus's practice, his plans for expansion, the kind of money that successful cosmetic dermatology could generate. After dinner, Linda pulled me aside in the kitchen while Marcus was in the bathroom. "He's lovely, Sarah. Really impressive. And that practice of his sounds incredibly successful." There was something in her voice, a calculating tone I recognized from years of watching her evaluate opportunities. "You've done well for yourself." The phrase sat strangely, not, "I'm happy you found someone who makes you happy," or, "He seems to care about you." "You've done well for yourself," as if Marcus were an acquisition rather than a partner. When Marcus and I got engaged a year later, Linda's response was enthusiastic in a way that felt slightly off target. She was thrilled about the ring, the venue we were considering, the fact that I'd be Mrs. Dr. Mitchell. She asked detailed questions about Marcus's business, his plans for expansion, his patient base. She seemed less interested in how we met, what we loved about each other, or what our life together would look like. It was as if she were evaluating a merger rather than celebrating a marriage. Jessica's reaction was more direct and somehow more honest. "Wow, Sarah, you really landed one," she said when she saw my ring. "A doctor with his own practice? Mom must be over the moon." There was something sharp in her voice. Not quite jealousy, but not quite approval either. I guess all that practical independent stuff really paid off. I didn't know how to respond to that. Was my relationship with Marcus some kind of vindication of Linda's treatment of me? Had her emotional neglect somehow prepared me to appreciate genuine care when I found it? The engagement period revealed new layers of my family's dysfunction. Linda wanted to be involved in every aspect of wedding planning, but her involvement felt more like market research than maternal care. She wanted to know about our guest lists, not because she cared about celebrating with people we loved, but because she was curious about Marcus's professional connections. She asked about our honeymoon plans with the kind of interest usually reserved for investment opportunities. When we mentioned we were thinking about a trip to Italy, her first response was, "That must be expensive. Marcus must be doing very well." Meanwhile, Jessica announced that she was moving back to Riverside after graduation. The job market in LA was tough, and she needed time to find herself artistically. Linda was immediately supportive, offering Jessica her old room, promising to help with job applications, suggesting that Jessica could take her time finding the right opportunity. No mention of rent or timelines or practical concerns. Jessica's dreams were still fragile flowers requiring perfect conditions. The contrast was stark and painful. When I graduated from Davis, I had exactly 2 weeks at home before Linda started asking about my job search timeline and suggesting I look into apartments. When Jessica graduated from USC, Linda started planning how to redecorate Jessica's childhood room to better suit an adult daughter who'd be staying indefinitely. The different standards were so blatant that even Bob seemed uncomfortable, though he never said anything directly. It was during this time that Linda met David Brennan at a work conference. He was recently divorced, charming, and enthusiastic about Linda's role as a devoted mother. He loved hearing stories about Jessica's artistic pursuits and Linda's sacrifices to support them. He was less interested in stories about me, but that was typical. Most of Linda's friends and romantic interests over the years had learned to focus their attention on
Jessica. It was easier, more rewarding, and Linda clearly preferred talking about Jessica's life to discussing mine. David's courtship of Linda was swift and sure. Within 3 months, they were talking about marriage. Within 6 months, he'd proposed. Linda was giddy in a way I hadn't seen since Jessica's high school graduation. She called to tell me about the engagement with breathless excitement, already making plans for the wedding, the reception, the future they'd build together. It was only after 10 minutes of wedding talk that she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that they were thinking about a small ceremony. Family only, very intimate. When I asked about the guest list, Linda was vague. Immediate family, a few close friends, nothing elaborate. When I asked if Marcus and I were included, there was a pause that lasted just long enough to feel deliberate. Well, of course, honey. We'll send you the details once we have everything figured out. But something in her voice suggested that our inclusion wasn't as automatic as she was pretending. Something was being calculated, weighed, considered. The calculation became clear 2 weeks later when Marcus announced that he and his partner Amanda were finalizing the purchase of a new medical complex in Riverside. The facility would house their expanded practice, complete with the latest laser technology, surgical suites, and a full medical spa. The investment was substantial, nearly $2 million in equipment and renovations, but the potential returns were enormous. Riverside's affluent population was underserved in high-end cosmetic dermatology, and Marcus had identified a perfect market opportunity. The day after the local newspaper ran an article about the new Mitchell and Rodriguez Advanced Dermatology Center, Linda called. Her voice was different, warmer, more interested than it had been in months. She wanted to know all about the new practice, the services they'd offer, the timeline for opening. She asked if they'd need help with marketing, community outreach, establishing relationships with local businesses. She even wondered if there might be opportunities for family members to be involved, to help spread the word about the amazing new facility coming to Riverside. Then, almost casually, she mentioned that she'd been thinking about the wedding guest list. We've decided to expand it a bit. David has more family than we initially thought, and I'd hate to leave anyone out. We want to make sure all the important people in our lives are there to celebrate with us. The shift was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Marcus's business success had suddenly made us important people in Linda's life. The wedding invitation arrived exactly 1 week later, addressed to Dr. and Mrs. Marcus Mitchell, with that handwritten note about consultation rates for the bridal party. The message was unmistakable. We weren't being invited as family. We were being invited as service providers. Linda wanted access to Marcus's expertise, his new facility, his professional capabilities. I was just the inconvenient middlewoman who happened to be married to what she actually wanted. I sat in my kitchen, staring at that invitation, feeling something shift inside me. For 32 years, I'd been trying to earn a place in Linda's world, believing that if I could just be good enough, successful enough, useful enough, she'd finally see me as worthy of her love and attention. But this invitation made it clear that I'd been asking the wrong question. The issue wasn't whether I was good enough for Linda's love. The issue was whether Linda's love was something worth wanting. The unspoken rules of our family weren't written down anywhere, but they governed every interaction with the precision of constitutional law. Rule number 1 was the most fundamental. Jessica's emotional state determined the weather in our house. If Jessica was happy, Linda was radiant. If Jessica was stressed, Linda became a crisis manager, mobilizing resources and attention with military efficiency. If Jessica was sad, the entire household shifted into consolation mode, with soft voices, favorite foods, and endless patience for her need to process every feeling out loud. My emotional state, by contrast,
was treated like background noise. When I was happy, Linda might offer a distracted smile before returning to whatever Jessica-related project currently occupied her attention. When I was stressed, Linda's advice was swift and practical. Make a list, prioritize, handle it. When I was sad, I learned quickly that there was no consolation mode for Sarah. There was just the expectation that I'd work through it quietly and emerge ready to be helpful again. This became crystal clear during my sophomore year in high school when I experienced my first real heartbreak. Tommy Nguyen, who I'd had a crush on for 2 years, finally asked me out, and we dated for 6 wonderful weeks before he broke up with me for Melissa Parker, who had better clothes and didn't work weekends. I was devastated in that particular teenage way where everything feels permanent and cosmic. I cried for 3 days straight, barely ate, and couldn't concentrate on anything. Linda's response was to check on me exactly once, bringing me a glass of water and a box of tissues while explaining that breakups were part of growing up and I'd be fine. She spent maybe 5 minutes in my room before Jessica called from downstairs, needing help with her science project. Linda patted my shoulder and said, "You're strong, Sarah. You'll bounce back," before disappearing to assist with the volcanic eruption that Jessica had decided to attempt the night before it was due. 2 months later, Jessica's boyfriend of 3 weeks, a drama club boy named Ryan, told her he thought they should see other people. Jessica's response was theatrical and comprehensive. She sobbed, she wouldn't eat, she declared that she'd never love again. Linda took a personal day from work to comfort her. Bob brought home ice cream and flowers. They watched Jessica's favorite movies together, ordered Chinese takeout, and created what Linda called a healing space in the living room, complete with blankets, pillows, and scented candles. I watched this unfold from the kitchen, doing homework at the table, and felt something inside me calcify. The message was unmistakable. Jessica's pain mattered enough to stop the world. My pain was an inconvenience to be managed efficiently. When I pointed out the disparity to Linda later, asking why Jessica got a personal day and Chinese food, while I got a box of tissues, Linda looked genuinely confused. "Well, honey, you handled your breakup so maturely," she said, as if my lack of family support had been a choice I'd made rather than a reality I'd been forced to accept. "Jessica needs more help processing difficult emotions. You've always been more resilient." The word resilient became Linda's favorite way to describe me, and I gradually understood that it was code for requires minimal attention, effort, or contradiction of friendly mother.
Minimal maintenance. Jessica was sensitive, artistic, complex. Sarah was resilient, practical, low maintenance. The rules extended beyond emotional support into every aspect of our daily lives. Jessica's schedule was sacred. Mine was infinitely flexible. If Jessica had rehearsal, Linda would rearrange dinner around it, sometimes eating as late as 9 o'clock so we could all eat together after Jessica got home. If I had soccer practice that ran late, Linda would leave a plate in the microwave and expect me to reheat it whenever I arrived. Jessica's social plans were treated as important commitments that the family needed to accommodate. My social plans were treated as optional activities that could be canceled if Jessica needed something. I learned this lesson definitively during my junior year, when my best friend Amy invited me to her Sweet 16 party on a Saturday night. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, had saved money to buy her a nice present, and had even found a dress at a thrift store that made me feel beautiful. Linda had agreed I could go, but the morning of the party, Jessica announced that she'd been invited to a last-minute cast party for the spring play and needed a ride. "I'm sure Amy will understand," Linda said, handing me the keys to her car with the expectation that I'd drive Jessica to her party instead of going to my own. "You're such a good friend, and there will be other parties. This is Jessica's first cast party. It's important for her theater connections." When I protested, pointing out that I'd made this commitment weeks ago and had already confirmed my attendance, Linda's expression shifted to that familiar disappointment mixed with impatience. "Sarah, this is what families do. We support each other. Jessica doesn't drive yet, and Bob and I both have commitments tonight."
The math didn't add up, of course. Linda could have easily canceled her book club meeting to drive Jessica, or Jessica could have asked one of her castmates for a ride. But those solutions would have required Jessica to be flexible or Linda to make a sacrifice. It was much simpler to ask Sarah to be understanding, to be the one who adjusted. I went to Jessica's cast party instead of Amy's Sweet 16, spent the evening sitting in a corner while Jessica and her theater friends discussed people and inside jokes I knew nothing about. Amy didn't invite me to her next party, and I couldn't blame her. Our friendship never fully recovered from what she saw as my choosing family over her, though she didn't understand that I hadn't chosen anything. The choice had been made for me, as it always was. The academic rules were perhaps the most insidious because they were framed as being supportive of both of us while actually being wildly unequal. Jessica's homework was a family project. Linda would sit with her every night, helping her organize assignments, proofreading papers, even calling teachers when Jessica was struggling with concepts. Jessica's backpack was checked daily, her assignments were entered into Linda's color-coded calendar system, and parent-teacher conferences were scheduled immediately whenever Jessica's grades dipped below a B. My homework was my responsibility entirely. Linda's philosophy was that since I was naturally academic, I didn't need help. If I asked for assistance with a difficult math problem, Linda would suggest I stay after school to work with the teacher. If I mentioned struggling with a research paper, Linda would remind me that the library had excellent resources. The assumption was that Sarah could figure things out independently, while Jessica needed guided support. This disparity was most obvious during finals week, each semester. The house would go into quiet mode for Jessica, with the television kept low, Bob asked to postpone any noisy household projects, and Linda available for flashcard sessions and study snacks. During my finals weeks, life proceeded normally. If I needed quiet to study, I was expected to close my bedroom door. If I needed materials for a project, I was expected to get myself to the store. Jessica's education was a family investment. Mine was a personal endeavor. The financial rules were even more explicit. Jessica's expenses were family expenses, automatically approved and budgeted for. When Jessica needed new clothes, Linda would take her shopping and pay without question. When she wanted to join expensive drama camp one summer, Linda picked up extra shifts to cover the cost. When Jessica decided she wanted to take private voice lessons, Bob redirected money from his golf budget to pay for them. My expenses required justification and negotiation. When I needed new cleats for soccer, I had to explain why my old ones couldn't be repaired. When I wanted to attend a summer journalism program, I was expected to present a detailed argument about how it would benefit my future career and contribute to paying for it myself. When I asked for money for a class ring, Linda suggested that class rings were unnecessary expense, and I should save my money for college instead. The message embedded in these different standards was that Jessica's desires were inherently valid, while mine required proof of worth. Jessica wanted voice lessons, therefore voice lessons were important. Sarah wanted a class ring, therefore Sarah needed to examine her priorities. Jessica's happiness was presumed to be valuable. Mine had to earn its keep. These rules created an ecosystem where Jessica learned that her needs would be met automatically, while I learned that my needs were secondary considerations. More damaging, though, was that both Jessica and I internalized these different standards as natural and appropriate. Jessica grew up believing she deserved immediate attention and support because that's what she'd always received. I grew up believing that asking for help was selfish because I'd been taught that capable people handled things independently. The social rules were equally clear, though never explicitly stated. Jessica's friends were always welcome in our home, treated like extended family members who could stay for dinner, sleep over on school nights, and claim space in our living room for their teenage dramas. Linda knew all their names, their parents' names, their relationship dynamics, and their academic struggles. She'd offer them advice, comfort them during friendship conflicts, and generally position herself as a safe adult they could talk to about anything. My friends were tolerated, but not embraced. They were welcome to visit, but Linda rarely remembered their names or showed interest in their lives beyond basic politeness. When Amy was going through her parents' divorce, she'd sometimes come over after school feeling sad and needing someone to listen. Linda would offer her a snack and then disappear, leaving us to handle Amy's emotional needs privately. Meanwhile, when Jessica's friend Chloe was upset about not getting a part in the school play, Linda spent an entire evening consoling her, offering perspective, and lovingly critiquing her so she could improve her audition skills for the next show.
Even calling Chloe's mother to coordinate additional support. The disparity taught both of us what kind of social connections were valued in our household. Jessica's relationships were complex, emotional investments worthy of adult attention and intervention. My relationships were private matters that I was expected to manage without involving the family resources. Perhaps most damaging were the rules about conflict and fairness. When Jessica and I fought, which was inevitable given the different standards we lived under, the resolution always followed the same pattern. Linda would listen to both sides with apparent fairness, then explain to me why I needed to be more understanding of Jessica's perspective. Jessica's actions were explained by her age, her sensitivity, her artistic nature, or her current stress level. My actions were simply actions that I needed to take responsibility for and modify. I remember a particularly illuminating fight when I was 17 and Jessica was 14. I'd been saving money for months to buy a specific camera for my photography elective, something I was passionate about and had researched extensively. I kept the money in a small box in my desk drawer, adding to it each week from my job at the medical supply company. One day, I came home to find Jessica using $20 from my savings to buy makeup at the mall with her friends. When I confronted her, Jessica burst into tears and ran to Linda, explaining that she'd been embarrassed because all her friends had better makeup and she just borrowed the money temporarily and would pay it back from her allowance. Linda's response was to comfort Jessica while asking me to step into the kitchen for a private conversation. "I know you're upset about the money, and you have a right to be," Linda said, using her most reasonable voice. "But Jessica made a mistake, and she's already learned from it. She's going to pay you back from her allowance over the next few weeks. What I need from you is to understand that she wasn't trying to hurt you. She was just embarrassed and made a poor decision." When I pointed out that taking money without asking was stealing, regardless of the intention, Linda's expression tightened slightly. "Sarah, that's a very harsh way to look at it. Jessica is your sister, and families help each other. Yes, she should have asked first, but calling it stealing is unnecessarily dramatic." The conversation continued with Linda explaining all the ways I could choose to be generous and understanding, while Jessica's behavior was framed as a temporary lapse in judgment that required forgiveness rather than consequences. Jessica never paid me back. Her allowance went to other things, and Linda never followed up to ensure the repayment happened. When I brought it up 2 months later, Linda seemed surprised that I was still thinking about it. "I thought you'd moved past that, honey. It was only $20 and you have a job." Jessica's allowance is already stretched pretty thin with her other commitments. The lesson was clear. Jessica's financial needs trumped my property rights, and my desire for fairness was petty grudge holding. These patterns repeated endlessly throughout our teenage years, with Jessica learning that her actions would be explained and excused, while I learned that my responses needed to be measured and mature. Jessica could be emotional, impulsive, thoughtless, and dramatic, because those were understandable teenage behaviors. I needed to be patient, flexible, generous, and understanding, because those were the qualities that kept our family functioning smoothly. The long-term impact of these unspoken rules was that Jessica developed an expectation of accommodation, while I developed a habit of accommodation. Jessica learned that other people would adjust to her needs, while I learned that I was the person who did the adjusting. By the time we reached adulthood, these patterns were so ingrained that neither of us questioned them. Jessica naturally assumed that family resources and attention would flow toward her, because they always had.
I naturally assumed that my role was to facilitate that flow because that's what I'd always done. When I moved away for college, I thought distance might change the dynamics, but the rules followed me. Phone calls home were dominated by updates about Jessica's life, with my experiences treated as brief intermissions between the main programming. When I came home for visits, I was expected to be interested in Jessica's latest projects, while my stories about college were met with polite but distracted attention. The rules had taught Jessica that she was inherently interesting and deserving of focus. They'd taught me that I was inherently useful and expected to provide support. Neither of us understood that these weren't natural personality differences, but learned behaviors created by years of unequal treatment. Jessica wasn't naturally more dramatic or needy. She'd been raised in an environment where drama and need brought resources. I wasn't naturally more independent or resilient. I'd been trained to believe that independence was my only option, and resilience was my most valuable quality. These realizations wouldn't come until much later, until I was far enough away from the family system to see it clearly. But even in those college years, I could feel the weight of the unspoken rules, the way they followed me into new relationships and situations, the way they whispered that my needs were secondary, my emotions were inconvenient, and my value lay in what I could do for others rather than who I was as a person. The rules had become so internalized that I didn't even recognize them as rules anymore. They felt like reality, like natural law, like the way families were supposed to work. It would take years and the perspective of a genuinely healthy relationship to understand that love wasn't supposed to come with such complicated conditions, that families could operate on principles of equity rather than hierarchy, and that my needs weren't inherently less important than anyone else's. But in those formative years, the rules reigned supreme, shaping every interaction and teaching both Jessica and I our designated roles in the family ecosystem. She was the sun around which everything else orbited. I was the reliable satellite, always present, always supportive, never requiring the kind of attention that might disrupt the system's delicate balance.